Welcome back for another book review. Today we are talking about this one. So this is Eclectic Witchcraft by Charlotte Wilde, Old Ways for Modern Magic. And yes, the sun has decided to illuminate this corner, so the lighting's gonna be weird. So this is a book that I was not sure if I was going to like it. It seemed very basic on a lot of the stuff. I was like, oh, okay, it's just like another one of those. But then about halfway through-ish, I ended up marking pages after pages after pages of stuff that I'm like, actually that's kind of intriguing, and it explains stuff that even I would like some notes on. And so I ended up actually really enjoying this book. It is definitely for beginners, but it surprisingly was good. It wasn't that it was bad at any point, really. It was just like, oh, it's kind of your usual thing. Okay, what are you gonna really add to the story of, you know, the beginner stuff, really? And then it got good. So I ended up really enjoying this book. And the main reason that I liked this is she talks about a lot of stuff. Again, about halfway through is when I really started to notice this. But it was like things like the crystals in the water. You always get the warnings. She gives you a list of like, these are like some common ones, obviously research further, but there's quite a few on the list that I didn't even know. We've heard the, like, you know, don't put like selenite into water, but there was other ones that it was like, oh, I didn't know that. Like, it was a really good list. And there were discussions on herbs, and like there was a little bit on like the baneful ones, but she's like, I'm not going to tell you too much about these because like honestly you need to research these very well, which is like fair because they are the poisonous ones. But then once you get into like the spell work and stuff, there was a lot that I felt like was really well explained. She talks about like when you're doing spell jars, like what items to include or not include, and like which ones you can reuse, and like again gives the warning for like salt, which is nice because a lot don't. And she talks about like the why, because it's not good for the soil. Like it's really well written. And like the section I personally really liked was on astrology. She goes through what the stuff is, and like when we talk about your natal chart, she goes over it, and it was like, I wish I had mine available because I always just rekey it in every time I need to look something up. I remember my top 3, but that's it. And so I need to just print it off and just have it. Because she talks about not just like your top 3, but she talks about like what the houses are and why it matters, and like your different things of like when your Mars is in whatever sign and your Mercury and blah, blah, and how some of them are more generational versus like you personally, because they take a very long time to move, so it kind of is like generational ones. And some were like every like 1 to 2 years, I think, and some were like, I don't know, like 8 to 9 years or something. Like it was all over the place. So that was really interesting. And it's like, she just explained the natal chart very well. As someone who was like, I don't know, it was very nice to have. She talked about the houses and like what each one represents, which was really nice. She also talked about like when things are empty in your chart and what that means, which is like, I didn't know you could have an empty house, but cool, because apparently you can. And like, again, I'm not super big into astrology, but this was such an interesting chapter that it was like intriguing, because for the most part, a lot of these were like, yeah, sure, that would make sense. That would be a good thing to know. And the ones that I did know, it was interesting to be able to look at and see what she thought, and like, because she has the zodiac stuff, and then you just kind of put it in. If you look up your natal chart, usually they will include this as well. But it was just kind of interesting, and it's like, it would be nice to have that ready to look at and then refer back. So I have that like marked. This is one of those books I do think eventually I will probably go and get. She also has a section on shadow work that I thought was really good as well. She talks about like how to do some shadow work, which is nice because normally they're like, just do it. Just do it. But she gives you prompts and like ways to actually do it, which is really nice. Like overall, this book was surprisingly good. She also at the end of each one will have a brief note talking about like, if you're in the broom closet, here's how to deal with this. And like some are obviously easier than others. If you want to do like meditation, most people aren't really gonna like notice or care. Like that one's a really easy one to hide, versus like your tools, that gets a little more complicated. And like your divination stuff, again, also can get really complicated. Like overall, I was thoroughly impressed that I ended up liking this book so much, because again, I thought it was just gonna be another like run-of-the-mill your generic like Witchcraft 101 book. She also talks about like advanced books and like why they aren't really like a thing very much. Like overall, this was just such a good book. It's a new release. See, it says new from the library. This is printed thingy from the library for August of 2023. So it's a pretty fresh book on the market. Personally, I really liked this. I do plan to get my own copy. Also, the artwork in here is just gorgeous. There's not too much, but when you get to like the chapter pages, even though I don't like snakes, I could appreciate that it's really pretty. Apparently, this author also has a podcast, so I'm very curious to listen to it because I always am looking for good like witchy podcasts because a lot of them I don't like, so I'm curious to see if it's good. I cannot stand the ones that are just interviews. It's just like a personal preference, but those I get so bored. I feel like a third wheel of a conversation, and like most of them I cannot stand. Like unless it's somebody that I specifically want to hear from, I don't care. Like I want the person to be talking to me, not to somebody else, and I'm just listening in awkwardly like that. I go through that all through life, so I don't really need that when I'm trying to listen to a podcast. That's just personal preference, but her podcast is Cosmic Cauldron. I haven't listened to it yet. But I did, one of the other books that I read through was by Jenny Blonde. I think it's like Home and Hearth Witchcraft. I always get the name. I always forget it. But I loved the book, so you'd think I would know it, but no. I need to buy it. And she has a podcast called Comfy Cozy Witch. I do really like that podcast, so I'm curious if it's going to be like that, where I'm going to end up loving the podcast or not. I don't know. I haven't listened to it yet. I've currently been going through Reddit podcasts because they're far more entertaining, but eventually I will go and listen to her podcast, I'm sure, see if I like it. But just as a heads up, she does have a podcast. If you really like this book, maybe it'll be good too. I don't know. I haven't looked yet, but I did want to mention that. So anyways, again, this was just a really good book. I was surprised. I really didn't have any high expectations for this book, and also it was a very nice break from the other book I'm trying to get through, which is this monstrosity of a book. This is so not my thing, but this writing style is fantastic. I like this style of writing way better than the other one. The other one's very academic and bland, and that just reads like a textbook. This reads like a book. Like you're just sitting down and the author's talking to you and teaching you stuff. I love this style of writing better. So anyways, I would love to hear your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. I know it's a new release. If you have gotten it, I would love to hear, or if you're watching this later on and there's more people talking about it, I would love to hear your thoughts still in the comments down below. Huge thank you to my patrons. I'll have their names over here. If you would like to support me and get access to exclusive content, it is patreon.com/nightwillowcrafts. If you would like to check out my book, I do have my own witchy book. It is The Death Journey. My pen name is Raven Wells. You can always find links to it in my blog in the description down below. Till next time, thank you so much for watching, and blessed be.